You are listening to another Clarkesworld Magazine podcast. I'm your host and narrator, Kate Baker. Welcome to the second story for the month of January. A whole new year, a whole new issue, and it's all thanks to you. So thank you again for subscribing, for telling a friend, for going to patreon.com/Clarkesworld or clarksworldcitizens.com. There are a myriad ways that you can support us, bringing you this wonderful fiction each and every month. The podcast, the art, the nonfiction, and paying the staff what it takes to put it all together. We simply cannot do this without you. Our second story for the month is Down We Go Gently and is by M.L. Clark. M.L. Clark is a writer, editor, and translator originally from Canada, now based in Medellin, Colombia. Clark's science fiction appears in a range of venues, including Analog, Clarkesworld, FNSF, and Lightspeed. Book and other media reviews appear in Strange Horizons. And if you like what you hear, we have a ton of stories here. A Planet Full of Sorrows, Lost and Found, Love Unflinching at Low to Zero G, Mercy and the Mollusk, 9 words for loneliness in the language of the Umau. So, my dear listener, I hope that you can sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. Harold didn't understand the point of merchant streets the first time his father took him portside to learn the tricks of planetary trade. Every module on Goliath was essential, seamlessly integrated and compact. But the wet, gritty material reeking of biodecay that clung to his boots on Peludo had a sprawling geometry, and everything that extended out from either side of the main throughway was sloppy, haphazard, and inefficient. If he fell into this muck, Harold wasn't convinced he would ever get out of it again. It was strange to both hate and be exhilarated by a place, all at once. Harold's father had suggested picking a focal point if it all seemed too much to take in, and not a settler or any other life form streaming past, because those bodies moved too quickly in relation to the mechanics of this space, and in ways that Harold's longer, thinner limbs couldn't easily match. The games of chase among other children were denied to him here, as were the deft twirls of adult messengers weaving through overburdened carts and sledges, and whatever it was the other animals were doing as they rounded corners and poked their heads in and out of storefronts to bark or mewl for attention. Harold focused on the grain stores farthest from their shuttle's landing pad, a hard limit to how far out in this city they would venture, and a promise that, once they were done with the grain ration, every step they took would be one step closer to the lander and the sea above. The grain stores had a logic to them, at least, even if all the frayed sacks and wooden rafters and noisy pack animals made for a shockingly wasteful set of transfer systems, with seed routinely scattering to the floor, and 2- and 4-legged critters always at risk of darting through it. Harold's father led the negotiations and settled their barter, while Harold sat on a stack of flour bags trying to calculate how much input energy went to waste with every day's lost figures on the storage room floor. Enough that Caragene on Goliath would start scraping tenths off one's ration card until the debt was paid. But here? I'll go back to the same place and end, Starboy, grinned a man who'd surely never used a dent-og tool in his life, for all the crooked yellow grays his smile flashed from across the counter. One way, oh the other. You haulin', oh we shippin'. This last was to Harold's father, and Harold looked up with an anxiety that surprised him. The thought of pushing grain together through streets of wet, sucking earth, even on a borrowed sledge, filled him with dread. But his father, long and angular, in a slim-fit jumpsuit over which he donned a cloak as a nod to local custom, set 2 more chits on the desk. Northfield landing zone, please. I think witchcraft should be obvious. The merchant snorted in shared amusement as he scraped the chits over his side of the counter and pocketed them. Goliath's lander was the only non-native vessel in the region, and most of what counted as ships in that landing zone had struck Harold more as poorly maintained artifacts than ready-to-ride forms of transport. The age and wear on polluted machinery had shocked him on arrival, even just as he was putting a lifetime of supplements and on-ship grav training to the test on what seemed like an endless array of concrete, and as he practiced breathing in an atmosphere more diversely pungent than any mess hall while Stavros was cooking. And the breeze, a sensation that initially sparked panic. Hull breach? Sudden depressurization? Before tendrils of this air feel rolled over his skin as a unique form of pleasure. Goliath's crew had scavenged from ship decay before, out in the sea of space, but the older builds here weren't abandoned so much as repurposed, allowed to become something more than their original design. The only native vessels in working order wouldn't even come close to breaching the upper atmosphere now, and served mainly to survey, provide rescue, and deliver water and migration for locals when required. As for the rest, there were pieces from the cannibalized builds in the metalworks that father and son visited next. The metalworks were another set of structures that made some sense to Harold. Whole corners of the build could be mistaken for quirkier holds aboard ship, replete with ancient machines, kept running only with a diehard's care and cursing. Just because Goliath ran on tight margins and high levels of disciplinary efficiency didn't mean the crew had shed their humanity in full. Each of them had their way of making the space their own. But even the worst hoarder on Goliath paled in comparison to the bizarre semi-shrines of ancient material in sections of Paluto's metalworks. Walls of useless trinkets that looked like they hadn't been recycled into communal holdings for years. Structures long since oxidized into larger disfigured groupings, clung to either for sentimental value or out of idle and thinking habit. And where was local outrage at the waste of it all? Harold's ears smarted at the mere thought of neglecting materials maintenance aboard ship, where a little moisture-based corrosion could go a long way to disrupting key electrical systems, and where the struggle against radiation and thermal cycling events never ended. Yet, in the middle of their transaction here, to secure replacement parts that required more intricate processes than they could implement on Goliath, Harold's gaze fixed on a scrap of metal behind the grizzled woman, taking his father's specs for design and delivery before lights out on this world. The scrap was bolted to the wooden wall and spotted with rust, but even faded, the symbol and text were clear. High heaven, here we come. Set above a stylized tree as rocket shooting through a dark blue circle. His mother talked about heaveners sometimes. She had been born on one of the offshoot ships, among a restless few either impatient with the journey or dissatisfied with the destination. They had gone their own way, she told them, out of some fundamental disagreements about the stories and lessons they needed to carry on. But others had clearly made it to Paluto, and maybe thrived. And their ships, like the tree form used in their logo, had taken root in strange ways here after all. Their vessels had passed from being anywhere near useful for flight to serving as cherished markers of the past. This, too, hit Harold as a vaguely familiar practice before his father had finished their business and clapped a hand on his shoulder with a simple "come." His thoughts had wavered from this worn-out monument to little placards that marked every lost life aboard Goliath, some lining the hold, some set along the corridors, but all embedded deep so as not to create edges that a suit or cargo might catch on in the heart-pounding urgency of an all-ship alarm. Harold stumbled once at the threshold of the metalworks, perhaps too caught up in his sudden recall of zipping through Goliath with endless ease, hooking the edges of open apertures between containment units with one hand, to whirl his body seamlessly around corners before bursting with each push-off into another rocket shot through the belly of his one and only home. A labyrinth he'd known forever. Ship song he knew by heart and in dreams. Conduit, nooks, and crannies he could fly through in his sleep. His father caught him, steadied him, told him to breathe and find his focal point again. But Harold hadn't settled on a new one yet. The grain stores loomed behind him, and the long, heavy sprawl of the main town lay ahead. The overwhelm was real, and he was riding it. All the same, he nodded to his father and pressed on. Next came the business that only seemed to exist because the proprietor had an itch to create or sell something, irrespective of its utility. Whole rickety stalls and roomy, enclosed structures with angled top sections called roughs by the locals bore curiosities like inedible plant life for special occasions, ornamental cuts of burnt wood and colored glass to liven up the home, and figurines modeled after cartoon versions of the animals ever underfoot. Harold reached out his hand to touch some of the dangling foliage and skim the shells of glossy ceramics. They didn't stay in place as firmly as mag-locked items on Goliath, but neither did their movement patterns align with free elements aboard ship. The sway patterns of plant life were different, and the little rotund figurines didn't scatter every which way at the merest touch. Harold wrestled, too, with a sense of affluence that came to mind as he took careful steps up and down the bin aisles of related trinkets and ornamentation. Who could afford to waste time and chits on such things? But despite this gut instinct, the chaos of Peludo's wares didn't fit with visions of wealth so much as of unmanaged excess, another quirk of these people's bizarre choice to live with only the rudiments of technology Harold used every cycle in the sea of space above. He thought he had wandered these aisles for a quarter hour at least, but when he made his way back to the front desk, his father was still reviewing their requested merchandise, cargo for transport and trade. When his father spied the puzzled look on him, something cracked around the corners of his eyes and mouth. Harold had always known his father to have a tired disposition, and the lattice work of scars on his hands, torso, and legs to justify its presence, but there was a dry humor in him, too. It's called a tourism economy, son. Whenever a ship comes by, we take some of these knickknacks with us to pass on to the next station or planet we encounter. He held up one, a tiny painting of a field under Peludo's yellow sky, on the magnetic surface with 4 fragments of dry stick creating what looked to be an altogether cheaply designed frame. The word Peludo in large bubble font was affixed to the sky. It doesn't have to be fancy or well-made. What matters is authenticity. An object that moved across our galaxy to end up at someone else's port. It takes time for payment to come back to the first planet, but when it does, the markup on the item makes for a tidy sum, and we collect a fixed percentage, which incentivizes us to find this lot a good buyer, right? Harold could only nod. The girl behind the counter was about his age and not at all interested in the conversation, possibly holding down the post until an elder returned. His father had to ask her a second time if she could arrange for shipment to the lander, and even then she sighed before saying, "Yeah, okay," and pulling the crate back to her side of the desk. At her reaction, Harold watched his father out of the corner of his eye. If he had responded with even a tenth of that attitude, there would be trouble on Goliath, but now they were on someone else's territory, and that made all the difference. Still, it wasn't that his father was indifferent to the girl's behavior. He wasn't reacting as he would have toward Harold, but there was something strange in his look, a calculating glint that Harold held tightly in his mind's eye. Processing as they left. They stopped at a street-side stand for a bite before continuing. Harold had both hoped and dreaded that they would. The savory concoctions wafting out in the open were as confusing in their complexity as they were enticing. A far cry from the limited flavor sets the crew would gather to consume before story and song aboard Goliath. But Harold settled into a state of apprehension as he watched a man and a woman working in tandem to meet the demand all around them. The woman with large, soft arms raised a massive metal implement up from the giant soup buckets, rich broths and noodles and local proteins overflowing from its sides, and set the contents into 2 wooden bowls and placed them on the counter before them. What if he didn't like it? What if he took ill after eating it, this elaborate meal sitting in open air on the street in this endless human settlement that stunk of everything all at once? "It won't kill you," said his father, as if reading his mind. The tall, thin man straddled one of the seats before the soup stand to consume his portion and whipped half his cloak behind him, the Goliath jumpsuit breaking through, so that he could hunch with greater ease over the bowl. His father even slurped from his spoon and smacked his lips and gave a thumbs up to the man and the woman. "How does it taste?" the woman said, even after all those approving gestures. Harold had noticed that locals use a lot of reaffirming speech patterns, a thing said, considered, or praised more than once before a conversation could be considered concluded. He didn't know if this was a Peludan distinction or a difference in general between spacers and the planet-bound. He couldn't tell if it annoyed or intrigued him either. Spacers, if used in different ways. Karajine's tirades, his mother's songs, Stavros's raunchy stories. But this echoing was different. Necessary, maybe, to deepen communal bonding in a place where it was so much easier for everyone to wander off and live in their own groups. Or maybe the habit had been created by a less urgent way of being, no one here needing to speak with as much precision as a crew did when implementing a critical action for the ship's survival, during which time all comms had to stay clear of other chatter. Like heaven, his father replied. From his calculating glint in the trinket shop, he now wore a more elaborate peel of a smile than Harold had ever seen on his face. He couldn't be sure, but he knew his father. Knew how his father bent in the sonic shower after masking a wound gained on an arduous shift, how he showed impatience with his fingers in long meetings, how he acted when he was cold or warm or urgently needy with Harold's mother in their quarters. There was contempt in the smile he displayed now, and in his whole grand performance of an answer to the woman behind the soup bin. But why? Harold sat down wearily and ate. He did not slurp. Then there was the menagerie, a multi-room hold that traded in livestock, and where one could also acquire pets, though Harold had trouble understanding what was meant by some of them. A dog, a rat, and a cat he'd already seen, but when Harold's father took him in for ground mealworm and cricket bricks, Harold was told to wait by a long, dimly lit corridor full of brightly colored insects. Useless, the lot of them. Useless to us, his father lightly amended, at which point Harold realized he'd spoken this last aloud. Cheeks burning, he turned to the minder of this establishment, an old man with an abundance of scraggly white hair coming out of his chin, nose, and ears. It was a marvel, that shock of hair spreading this way and that, because it didn't seem to know, as Harold acutely did in his ankles, hips, and knees, that it was operating in a 1.2 SG environment. The old man chuckled. "Now, amigo, this boy right about distance. Here, I'll show." "Oh, you don't have to." The old man shushed Harold's father with a wave of both arms and tottered around the desk to bring out a large rectangular enclosure. Even before he'd fully returned from the shadows, Harold could see a small, slithering form behind the glass, weaving, it seemed, on a branch, with 2 giant eyes and a pointed head. The old man set the case on the counter, then tapped the glass lightly. "This, the earth, what a many sent to us, tested for fit and tossed. You know this one." Harold pulled from what he could remember of animal forms from vids. "Snake?" The old man grinned. "Not bad for guessing. Idea was some fires on Pluto would think the same. Leave 'em alone and let 'em pollinate the long-necked flowers. Need something to replace the species we keep killing with our rigs. Need a bug with no defenses for new arrivals like us. So we asked for this one, a caterpillar making to become a perfect moth. But this one can't make it here either. Keeps getting ate up, even if this one look enough like a snake to spook a fire back on Earth. But why? No bird-eating snakes here, his father guessed. The old man whistled appreciation and tipped a finger at Harold's father. "No such snake," he agreed. "None to spook a fire, at least. No dissin took millions of years to evolve just right for its original crewmates, maybe you call them up in space. Then we took dissin across the galaxy, dropped it here, and for what? To fatten fires while our flowers still go unpollinated to waste. So like you say, useless." By this point, Harold had almost pressed his nose to the glass, inspecting the brown insect with bulging black eye spots on a V-shaped protrusion and a bright yellow underside. "So why not kill it?" he said. "Add its biomass to the project and start over." The old man's gear-grinding hum of amusement filled the room. "Only solution you dreamin', eh? None others come to mind?" Harold's father was the first to full-throated laughter, the sound of sudden realization. Oh, so that's why you wanted these." He touched his boot to the trade crate they'd brought with them, but gently. The old man nodded, then winked at Harold. "Snakes, yes'm. Fire-eating snakes. Now we teach the fires to spook like never before. Then this one." He tapped the glass again, even as the little caterpillar's performance was winding to a close. "Won't be useless after all. Flowers pollinate again. Crops take off. Balance restored. Problem, son? Harold's expression had given him away, but he couldn't tell if he looked more puzzled or skeptical. Planets were bigger than Goliath and messier. Probably the strict rules aboard ship to avoid contamination, like a deadly bacteria or fungus in hydroponics, or a new staff variant in the sonic showers, could be relaxed in a place where everything flowed so freely into everything else. The animals in the grain house, the mud on his boots, the stench in the air. What if these snakes don't work the way you want them to? Like you said, Peludo's already knocked out one pollinator by accident. Now this one's turned out to be a better food source than a replacement pollinator. What if adding another predator just makes an even bigger mess of the whole local ecosystem? Harrelson, his father set a hand on his shoulder. But the old man waved off Harold's father again and winked at the son. Then we send for new options, and your ship, or whatever ship comes next. For us, we'll never lack protein bricks and trade. So everybody wins. Now, gonna be you two carrying this stack. Or I be finding other hands for the walk. We'll take them ourselves, said Harold's father. It's his first time in real SG. A little work out surface side was always a part of the plan. First time. The old man whistled appreciatively at Harold, then jerked his head toward the glass enclosure where the caterpillar now rested, as a dull lump, blending in the surrounding elements of branch and leaf. Guess now comes your test, son. Gonna fit in here, or be useless, too. Harold wanted to protest that he hadn't come to Peludo to fit in, but something left a hitch in his throat when he tried to speak, and besides, the vendor was already chuckling and tottering off with the glass enclosure to set it gently back on its shelf. Maybe it was the look of that container, too, so small against the rest of the menagerie, just one tiny ship among so many on the old man's shelves. How many other Goliaths had come to Peludo over the long sun cycles, filled with people who'd spent most of their lives crafting everything about themselves to survive in one tiny ecosystem? Harold scratched his arms uncertainly before moving to join his father at the first crate. They had a sledge waiting outside to help with the lot, but it would still take time. And as they worked together in the tight and efficient silence that Harold and his father also kept aboard ship, Harold kept imagining his skin swelling up with massive eye spots, waving and weaving at the locals, trying to ward them off in a language of threat display that meant nothing to the people of Peludo at all. But he couldn't figure out why until the lights started to dim around them. On Goliath, after turndown, life was simple. Go to your bunk or your alt-cycle post. But here, nocturnal creatures started singing to life all around them, and different registers of wind whipped through overgrown stalks of biomaterial lighting the main throughway. And then... Here, his father said, bringing the sledge to rest by a bench outside a building with bright lights and heavy laughter radiating from within. Wait here. His father offered no explanation for the scratches on his neck when he came back. While Harold waited, he wasn't exactly alone. Two women were idling nearby, in slim-fit outfits of a type Harold had seen on station ports at times, attention-grabbing by design. They didn't cover so much as accentuate, with footwear that Harold supposed could double as a self-defense measure, too. He didn't know why he stared at first. He looked away when he realized he was and studied the scrawl of Peludo text on the side of the cargo they were hauling. So what you think, Starboy? You liking our town? Or you ready to be done so soon? Ellie, hush now. You think he's enjoying this, being out here waiting on his dog? First time on a real planet, too? That's what Fawcett be saying. Oh, he must be so tired. The first woman crossed her arms with a hurt look on her face. Aw, sorry, kid. I didn't mean nothing by it. Just curious is all. You know, we don't get many outsiders here. You're kind of special for us, too. Harold looked up nervously, trying to keep his gaze level with her eyes. It's fine. Thanks, he said. I'm fine. And he smiled to make his point. You see, he's fine, Jules. All fine, all good. Yeah, all good, said Jules, shorter, with something in her voice that reminded Harold of his mother. Jewel sat down beside him and offered a packet of what looked like food. Nuts, she said. Real good ones, too. Keep your strength up while you wait. Harold took them and held them in his hands. Thank you, he remembered to say, though why he was faltering around what always came automatically aboard ship confused him. It felt different here, like choice, like he could choose to say or do or not say or do a great many things that there was no time to think about or question back on the Goliath. Hey, ask you a question. Harold looked at her carefully in the eyes, too, and nodded. You know why your ship called Goliath? Only ask 'cause I got heaven or blood, see? Keep my roots close where I can. She flashed a trinket around her neck, the blue circle of the tree, as a rocket. Harold glanced at it, then away. My father says, he began, though the words felt fuzzy in his throat. He cleared it and tried again. Father says it's for strength. You can't afford not to be strong in space. You have to be the biggest, toughest thing wherever you go and never let anyone else tell you how the story's gonna go. Or else how will you survive it? Jules leaned back, a glitter of interest in her eyes. That's so. That's what your dad be telling you about Goliath. Harold didn't know why he wanted to offer up more details to these women, but something about the attention they were giving him made him want to give them more. And my mother, he said quickly. She says so, too. She's also heaven or blood. Well, from one of the breakaways, at least. The two women quickly exchanged glances, and their demeanor changed. Oh, hon, said Ellie. We should get going, said Jules, patting Harold on the knee before she stood. Eat up, though, yeah? You're gonna need your strength more than most of us, Starboy, to survive. And in his confusion as the women left, Harold was indeed tempted to tear a corner of the paper wrapper and give them a try, but then his father showed up, with those scratch marks all over his face and with heavily lidded eyes and puffier than usual cheeks. And when Harold looked past him to the door swinging shut, he saw women and men inside, together. Come, son, was all his father said. We're done here. Time to move on. But when Harold made to stand, he wobbled again, struggling to find his balance. It wasn't the planet that got him exactly, but it was a kind of gravity, a sudden lurching weight of realization that when they got back to his tiny stronghold of a home, back to a world cut off from everything until their next remote drop, and the next, well, what would he say? What could he say? What would be right? What would do the least harm? His father towered over him as Harold righted himself. Find your focus, his father said. I'm not hauling this ledge alone. Harold nodded and swallowed and tried his best to comply. Pluto was primitive by many measures. A throwback, yes, but there was courage to the throwback. And openness. So much openness. When Harold had said thank you to the nice women who had sat with him, it was the first thank you he could ever recall not feeling compelled to say. Not at all like the thank you for my birth. Thank you for my life. Thank you for my continued existence in the deep sea of space that filled his every other cycle. Thank you for the air I breathe. Thank you for the stern, swift correctiveness whenever I do wrong. Thank you for the work I get to do to become like you, too. In the deepening darkness, Harold stared at a patch of mud beside the door his father had just exited. A patch of soft, damp earth lit up in hazy oranges and reds by the building's vibrant window glow. The mess of it wasn't perfect, but it fit. Harold inhaled, exhaled, and took careful steps toward his corner post by the sledge. Together, they heaved. Together, they dragged his last load to the waiting lander, where all their other treasures from this cycle's abundant haul were already tucked within. Then, Harold allowed himself one quick glance at Pluto's haphazard stretch of differently constructed humanity before he scaled the canted lander platform so his father could shut the hatch and seal them in. As they strapped in for flight, Harold again imagined himself as that snake moth, But this time, not weaving and flashing warning colors at potential predators, just waiting in one small glass enclosure on a shelf with so many others. The packet of nuts tucked into his jumpsuit put pressure on his chest during their ascent. To make him stronger, the woman had said. But strong enough for what? As they crested the upper atmosphere, pinprick stars appeared against the pitch-black sea of space, and Harold looked at his father, crowing from his harness. 3 livid red lines deepening behind one ear. The contrast startled him, his father and the vastness of the cosmos. And he wondered why. He'd never seen it before. How small a giant, too, can so easily become. What are your thoughts on the story? You can send us an email. I'm Kate@Clarkesworldmagazine.com, and that is Clark with an E. We have a bunch more stories left for you for the month, the brand new year. I do hope you'll come back and listen, should you so choose. And until then, my dear listener, I bid you very fond and hopefully very temporary farewell.